Okay, here are some notes on Dick Gregory's shame. This is an excerpt from his autobiography, but it does still stand alone as a decent example of a memoir or a narrative essay. Okay, he talks about Helene Tucker, whom he refers to in the third line of the story as a light complexioned little girl with pigtails and nice manners. And what he means by light complexioned is that Helene Tucker is also a black girl, but he's in love with her because she's pretty and she's clean, and this is his first crush, if you will. Okay, um, I'd like to look at the second column where actually it starts at the bottom of the first column. I guess I would have gotten over Helene by summertime, but something happened in that classroom that made her face hang in front of me for the next 22 years. When I played the drums in high school, it was for Helene. When I broke track records in college, it was for Helene. When I started standing behind microphones and heard applause, I wished Helene could hear it too. It wasn't until I was 29 years old and married and making money that I finally got her out of my system. Why was that? It was because Helene was sitting in that classroom when I learned to be ashamed of myself. Okay, so there's something that he does here with the syntax or the sentence structure, and it's parallel structure or parallelism. So when he begins successive phrases in sentences with when I played drums in high school, it was for Helene. When I broke track records, it was for Helene. When I stood behind microphones, it was for Helene. So that repetitive balance in successive sentences and phrases creates a kind of rhythm. But it also, what parallel structure does is it forces us to kind of catalog and compound everything that he's listing. So in phrasing it that way, we start to understand how one thing compounded upon something else, compounded upon something else. And he does that a little bit later in the essay as well. In the next paragraph, it begins with, it was on a Thursday. I was sitting in the back of the room in a seat with a chalk circle, idiot seat, troublemaker seat, and so on. And then he goes on in this middle paragraph here. The teacher thought I was stupid, couldn't spell, couldn't read, couldn't do arithmetic, just stupid. And he goes on about being hungry and wanting to eat something and maybe stealing a bit of someone's lunch. And then he talks about paste. Now, this story would have taken place back in the, I believe it was the 30s. Yeah, Dick Gregory was born in 1932, so he was 7 years old when this story takes place. So it's around 1939. Back then, glue was actually made from like a floury substance in water, like the word gluten, which is gluten is in flour. That's where you get the word glue. So he's talking about eating glue here. Not all that crazy when you consider that there would have been some floury texture in it. All right, and then he goes on to say, pregnant people get strange tastes. I was pregnant with poverty, pregnant with dirt, pregnant with smells that made people turn away, pregnant with cold, pregnant with shoes never bought for me, pregnant with 5 other people in my bed, pregnant with hunger. So again, the parallel structure of pregnant with, pregnant with, pregnant with, in creating that, structuring it in such a way, it forces us to compound one upon another, and it just has a greater impact than it would have had if it were phrased differently. The other thing is that he chooses the word pregnant. You know, he segues into it by talking about how a pregnant woman might crave strange things to eat, and he was craving this glue. But he takes it further in talking about being pregnant with dirt, and pregnant with smell, pregnant with cold, and so on. And why use this word pregnant? What other word could have been used? Perhaps burdened with, weighted down with something. But pregnant is appropriate because it becomes part of his identity. It feels to him like it's something he can't hide from anyone. Not only does it weight him down, this burden of his poverty, but it's just, when you're pregnant, you can't put it aside and go and do your own thing for a while. It's just part of you that you cannot separate from. And that's why it's an appropriate word for him to use in this context. Okay, and then he has the paragraph, teacher thought I was a troublemaker. All she saw from the front of the room was a little black boy who squirmed in his idiot seat and made noises and poked the kids around him. I guess she couldn't see a kid who made noises because he wanted someone to know he was there. Then on the next page, we'll get into how the teacher humiliates him in the classroom. And when I teach this in the classroom and I have a discussion with my students, we talk about this teacher. Why is she so mean to him? And often students respond that, well, she's racist. She doesn't like him because he's a little black boy. But we have to remember it's 1939. We have to remember that Helene Tucker is a light complexioned little black girl. And in 1939, with black children in the classroom, what are the odds that there's a white teacher teaching black students? This happened in, I believe, Missouri. And the answer is no, that's not likely. So we have to understand this is a black teacher with black children. And she doesn't like Richard because he's the poor kid, because he's the dirty kid, and because he even confesses that he makes trouble. He pokes other kids around him. And so, yeah, she's a horrible person. But we've got to keep it straight that she's not motivated by race in this context. Okay, so then he, in the next paragraph, says, it was on a Thursday, the day before the Negro payday. Um, if we go back up 1, 2, 3 paragraphs, we see that that paragraph also began, it was on a Thursday, I was sitting in the back of the room, seat with a chalk circle. And so this is kind of what happens when we're telling a story. You're like, I'll never forget where I was on the day that that happened. I still remember 9/11. It was on a Tuesday. I took my baby for a walk. I mean, that's me speaking. Okay, you may not have been born yet. In fact, most of you probably weren't. But anyway, let's move on. The fact that he begins with 3 paragraphs earlier saying it was on a Thursday, and then in the next paragraph he goes on into that rant about glue and pregnant with and so on, and then he's got to come back to his story a couple paragraphs later, it was on a Thursday. What he's captured here we call stream of consciousness. And that's typically a technique used in fiction stories where we get into a character's head and the thoughts are rambling around in their head, and the story is told with psychological links rather than chronological links. That's what stream of consciousness captures. And that's what he's captured here in telling this story. As he went back in his memories and recalled this day when he was humiliated, he still remembers the day. He still remembers it was a Thursday. And as he recalls that, it triggers, you know, memories and smells. All of you might hear a song and it triggers a memory, which triggers, or smell a candle and you remember your grandmother and so on. Our minds work like that. It's a web in there of psychological patterns and links. And so the story loses the chronological sequence, which is why he has to come back to it. Okay? And that stream of consciousness. And then when he comes back to it, it was on a Thursday, day before Negro payday. The eagle always flew on Friday. What that means is back in the day when you would receive a check from the government, whether it was your tax return or your Social Security check, or in this case, it's the welfare check, it always had a big American eagle in the corner. So that's why they would say the eagle flew on Friday. It means that the welfare check came in on Friday. Okay, so this is when the teacher is asking the students what they're going to contribute, and then Richard or Dick Gregory, keep in mind he's 7 years old. He's going to buy himself a daddy. At 7 years old, you're still living between that make believe world and reality. And so Richard just thinks that it's that easy. He can just say, my daddy gave me this money, and in his little world, he's going to create the fact that he has a daddy that gave him money for the community chest. Okay? And then the teacher um, humiliates him. I'm at the top of the fourth column now. And furthermore, she said, looking right at me, her nostrils getting big, her lips getting thin, her eyes opening wide, we know you don't have a daddy. Oh, this is heartbreaking. Helene Tucker turned around, her eyes full of tears. She felt sorry for me. Then I couldn't see her too well because I was crying too. It might have been easier for Richard if Helene Tucker had laughed at him, but she didn't. She pitied him. And even though he's 7 years old, he's a human being with a sense of pride and dignity that has just been assaulted by this teacher who has put him down um, in such a hurtful way in front of this classroom, but specifically this girl that he admires who now feels sorry for him. And so he walks out of school and didn't go back. And in the next paragraph, the parallel structure again, there was shame there. Now there was shame everywhere. It seemed like the whole world had been inside that classroom. Everyone had heard what the teacher had said. Everyone had turned around and felt sorry for me. There was shame in going to the Worthy Boys dinner. There was shame in wearing the brown and orange plaid mackinaw. There was shame in walking down the street. There was shame in going and digging through a pail full of garbage. There was shame in asking for rotten peaches. Okay? So see the compounding of this list that he's creating of projecting now his own humiliation onto the world around him. He feels like the whole world witnessed that moment. And this is what happens when we are humiliated. You know, the rest of the world forgets about it 2 minutes later. Excuse me. But we carry that sense of shame or humiliation, and we imagine that everybody was a witness to it, even though they're not. And so that last line, yeah, the whole world heard the teacher that day. We all know you don't have a daddy. And so Dick Gregory, from this experience, he talks about how it motivated him to be successful. And he did become successful. He founded a political party. He ran for president in the 1960s. He was a good friend of Martin Luther King Jr.'s. He was a civil rights activist and a successful comedian. So we feel for him in this circumstance, but perhaps we can also understand that sometimes these kinds of experiences make us better people, stronger people as a result.